Welcome to Talking Cybersecurity with HMS Industrial Networks. Hi, my name is Jason Block with HMS Industrial Networks. I am the Solution Manager for our Industrial Internet of Things products here. And today we're going to discuss best practices for managing users and permissions for remote connectivity solutions in your factory. So the first thing to think about when considering how to best manage user permissions is to understand what are the things that those people need to connect to. So those things, and we're going to talk about this from a factory perspective, could typically consist of networks down on the factory floor. They could be assets, and those assets could be a combination of machines. They could be devices on those machines as well. Or it could be the data from those specific assets. And those all can reside in different areas. So the networks, for example, typically are the host environment for your assets to live on. So that's kind of the first point of access when getting it down to the asset level. And with those machines can be different devices on there. Things like PLCs, things like HMI could be on there. And it's important to understand those machines from a granular level, because when we're thinking about user access, you might have to think about not only can the user access the machine, but can the user access specific devices on the machine? Those things are key as well. And then data, that typically is going to exist in some type of server hosting environment. And you have to think about how that user accesses that data and how you manage permissions into those environments as well. So those are the first things to think about, is that what are the things that I need to gain access to? Secondly, I need to consider what are the people and how intrinsic is it that they get access to that, and what is their need for getting access to those specific assets? So is it a need for being able to service a system? So if I think of it that my asset, once again, is a machine, do I need somebody who needs to be able to update the software in a PLC, or needs to basically troubleshoot alarms that have been noted, those type of notifications? There's a service component to it. Or is there need to be able to do configuration? So do I need access to a SCADA application in order to be able to load a recipe for the application? These type of things there. Or do I need to basically load simple configurations for the machine to basically output a new component or a new part? These type of things there. So service is basically more, kind of more granular aspect of accessing the machine. And then configuration, more of a setup kind of deal. So configuration, calibration, making adjustments. So all these can affect kind of the degree of permissions and how deep into the system that they need to go. And then lastly is information. And this can be more of a managerial function to understand what is happening in a system. Less of a granular access into the system, but more of an overview and an understanding from that perspective. So all these different people might have different needs for this type of rights to get to the system. So a person who's doing service might need access to everything in there, to the PLC, the HMI, the drives, everything that is on that asset. Where for configuration, maybe they only need access to the HMI for being able to do read and write specific parameters within the machine or the asset itself. And then for information, oftentimes these are only read-only type access needs that are from that perspective. So they have basically a much lesser need there. And all these are basically handled by some administration function. So the administrator or the group of administrators is the team that owns all of these user rights that's in there. So this is an intrinsic part of the solution. So once again, to kind of review very quickly, understand the things that people need to get access to, and then understand the people, whether it's necessary that they get connectivity in that system. And then the administrator serves the role of basically being the arbiter over what type of access they get in there. So in terms of doing these systems, I want to go through some key recommendations on how best to handle these things. The first thing I want to talk about is, and the administrator is the key role in this, the administrator owns the solution. So it's very important to have basically a team of administrators, and the key thing is to avoid a single administrator who is responsible for everything. So it's important to have a team of administrators, multiple administrators, and to make sure that you have a sound successor plan for each of those functions. So that way, if I have a single administrator's solution, and that administrator leaves, now I basically have an unadministered solution, which either can't be changed or adjusted. So if a user leaves the company and all of a sudden becomes a bad actor, then I have that as a vulnerability in my system. So it's very important that this administration team be persistent in nature. So that's key recommendation number one. The second recommendation is to make sure that you're pooling your assets. So once again, when I talked about earlier, I talked about on an asset, maybe a user only needs to see specific components on that asset. And from an asset perspective, there may be specific machines or assets that basically certain people only need access to. So maybe not every machine, not every component on there. So it's important to basically, for the sake of simplicity in managing these things, pool assets so that it makes it much easier to assign users to those assets, which brings us into our third key recommendation, is to make sure that you're adding your users into creating groups of users. So what are their user rights, and manage it from that perspective so that you can understand it. It's a better way of organizing it. So that way I can manage specific groups of users that might have access to specific assets. So user 1 and user 2 here may need access to asset 1 and asset 2, and user 3 and user 4 may need access to asset 3 and asset 4, but they don't necessarily need access to asset 1 and asset 2. This can be critical from the perspective of managing not only internal resources, but also managing third-party resources who might be responsible for specific systems that exist on your plant floor, but not everything that's down there. So those are our 3 core recommendations that I provide today, and this is our overview of the things to consider when thinking about how can you best administer users and permissions for remote connectivity solutions on the factory floor. Thank you for joining us today, and take care and have a wonderful day.